Australia's recently ousted Prime Minister Tony Abbott may have been the first skeptic of catastrophic man-made global warming theories and alarmism to get pushed out. But if alarmists get their way ahead of an upcoming United Nations climate change summit in Paris this December, Abbott will not be the last to fall. Indeed, Canadian Prime Minister Stephen Harper is also already in the crosshairs of the tax-funded global warming establishment, which wants desperately to ensure that there are no hiccups in Paris as governments, dictators, and the UN work to impose a planetary climate regime on humanity. 2 years ago, Australia's Abbott and his liberty-minded Liberal Party secured a landslide victory against the big government-promoting Labour Party and its deeply unpopular carbon taxes. Analysts were virtually unanimous in attributing Abbott's electoral success to his party's plan to scrap the carbon tax and put the taxpayer-funded global warming alarmism on ice. And he delivered on most of his promises, with the Liberal Party and its allies quashing the carbon tax and putting the UN on notice that Australia would no longer be supporting what they called socialism masquerading as environmentalism. Abbott himself has been quoted referring to the agri theory as absolute crap and worked hard to slash tax funding for climate hysteria. Abbott's advisor, the Prime Minister's Business Advisory Council Chairman Maurice Newman, poked the agri hornet's nest once again this summer. Writing in the Australian newspaper, Newman pointed out that the climate hoax was actually aimed at imposing a totalitarian new world order on humanity under the guise of saving the climate. We have been subjected to extravagance from climate catastrophists for close to 50 years, he explained, citing an array of examples of climate fearmongers and media outlets warning of global cooling and other problems just a few decades ago. The real agenda, Newman concluded, is concentrated political authority, with global warming merely serving as the hook. Just this month, it emerged that Abbott was getting serious about properly investigating long-suspected manipulation of temperature data by government agencies. According to news reports, the Prime Minister was interested in doing due diligence and finding out what was going on at the tax-funded Bureau of Meteorology, which had been accused in the media of fudging data to exaggerate alleged global warming. Of course, various politicians, tax-funded alarmists, and tax-funded media such as the ABC, which Abbott had clashed with before, became enraged, and not just because Abbott had worked to protect taxpayers from having to fund the propaganda. According to Australian climate analyst Joe Nova, resistance to due diligence in temperature data was aimed at protecting climate profiteers and tax funding for alarmism. Evidently the ABC prefer unscientific, hidden methods that support the global warming narrative, rather than good meteorological data acquired in a transparent and open manner, she wrote. Some things matter, eh? Their actions show it is not about the environment, but about supporting fellow rent-seekers and coal lobbyists for big government. She also lambasted Australian Environment Minister Greg Hunt, a member of Abbott's party, for opposing good environmental data and due diligence. For the UN, the climate alarmism industry, the third world dictators demanding climate reparations, the crony capitalists hoping to profit off the hysteria, and even some members of Abbott's own party, all of the Prime Minister's skepticism about the warming theories was simply unacceptable. And so, on September 14, Abbott was overthrown by members of his own party in an uprising led by global warming alarmist Malcolm Turnbull, who unceremoniously replaced the former Prime Minister until parliamentary elections scheduled for next year. The vote was 54-44 in favour of replacing Abbott. Turnbull, a multimillionaire former Goldman Sachs banker and Rhodes Scholar, has long been shilling for climate profiteers, demanding, among other schemes, a carbon trading policy to help enrich mega banks, such as Goldman Sachs, and other crony capitalists. Of course, similar carbon trading schemes in Europe have resulted in horrors across Africa and Latin America as carbon machinations backed by the UN, the World Bank, and the European Union brutally uproot entire villages to plant trees for carbon credits. But Australia's new globalist Prime Minister has been extremely vocal in demanding more of the same. As we are being blunt, the fact is that Tony and the people who put him in his job do not want to do anything about climate change. Turnbull fumed in 2009. They do not believe in human-caused global warming. As Tony observed on one occasion, climate change is crap, or if you consider his mentor, Senator Manchin, the world is not warming, it's cooling, and the climate change issue is part of a vast left-wing conspiracy to deindustrialize the world. More recently, Turnbull acknowledged doubts about the accuracy of discredited climate models. 73 out of 73 UN models have been proven wrong amid 20 years of no global warming, NASA satellite data shows. But he nevertheless claimed Australia should pursue a prudent, cautious insurance approach, and say, we should seek to restrain the growth of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, insofar as we can, in order to offset the chance. Turnbull has pledged to keep Australia's current climate policies until at least the next election. After all, it was promises of getting rid of carbon taxes that brought the Liberal Party to power in the first place. He also vowed to keep the Abbott government's UN pledges on reducing emissions of the gas of life, CO2, in place. Still, global warming alarmists immediately began celebrating the coup against Abbott. They have also been predicting that Turnbull's rise to power could help push an even more radical agenda at the upcoming UN Climate Summit in Paris, where parasites, as critics are calling them, will gather from around the world in an effort to ration energy use, empower the UN, and transfer more climate loot from Western taxpayers to third world dictators and regimes. Radical left-wing environmental groups funded by the globalist Rockefeller big oil dynasty could hardly contain their joy at Abbott's removal ahead of the UN Climate Summit in Paris. Abbott was famous for saying coal is good for humanity. Thankfully, Australians decided Abbott didn't fit into the same category, claimed Jamie Henn, spokesman for the Rockefeller-funded alarmist group 350. Without noting that Australians voted for Abbott and that it was party insiders who ousted him, or that cheap electricity from coal has saved millions of lives and helped bring billions out of poverty. In 2015, you can't say climate change is absolute crap and run a major democracy, Henn added. In one of several celebratory pieces of propaganda boasting of Abbott's political misfortunes, the Washington Post also made clear that the agro cartel was not done yet. In the article, headlined "Tony Abbott is out of a job, and another leading climate change skeptic may soon follow," the Post warned that anti-communist Canadian Prime Minister Stephen Harper may be next in line for failing to grovel sufficiently before the tax-devouring warming theorists and their increasingly discredited agro theory. Under Harper's watch, Canada has assumed the role of a kind of petrostate, a transformation that reflects Ottawa's apparent lack of seriousness in enacting meaningful climate change policy, reported journalist Ishaan Thoreau, blasting Harper for allegedly proposing a conservative alliance among like-minded countries to work against Obama's climate antics. Though separated by thousands of miles, warming alarmist Thoreau continued, referring to Abbott and Harper, their political fates may soon echo the other. With the UN, Obama, and the rest of the parasites working vigorously to impose their draconian climate regime on humanity this December, it appears that the alarmist movement is all hands on deck trying to bring down skeptics, no matter who they are or where they may be. Pseudo-scientists and politicians in the United States are even calling on Obama to prosecute climate realists using an anti-mafia law. However, the whole agro movement, ridiculed as a cult or global warming Nazis by climate experts, knows very well that its whole agenda is facing an uphill battle. From discredited models and embarrassing false predictions to growing amounts of evidence pointing to an upcoming period of natural global cooling, this may be the final chance to impose their agenda. having convinced just 40% of Americans of their increasingly discredited theory, and facing a US Senate that is all but sure to reject any UN global warming regime that comes before it as required under the US Constitution for all treaties, alarmists are scrambling. They have too much at stake to give up now. So does the free world, however. Americans, Australians, and Canadians who hope to preserve their liberty, prosperity, and self-government must get busy and quickly.